I never thought my own family would look me in the eye and tell me I didn't belong at my own dinner table. But there I was, standing in the doorway of what I thought was my childhood home, watching my sister-in-law Janet settle into my usual seat like she owned the place. The Sunday roast was getting cold, and 23 pairs of eyes were staring at me like I was the problem. "Brenda, just sit somewhere else," my mother said, without even looking up from her mashed potatoes. Her voice carried that familiar tone of exhaustion, like I was a child throwing a tantrum over something trivial. "Janet needs that spot. She's pregnant and it's closer to the bathroom." My brother Michael didn't even bother with an explanation. He just shrugged and cut into his roast beef like nothing had happened. "Come on, Brenda, don't make this weird. Family comes first, right?" But it was my father's words that hit deepest. He looked up from his plate with those tired brown eyes and said the words that would haunt me for weeks. "You don't belong in that spot anymore, sweetheart. Things change." I felt my chest tighten, that familiar burn of humiliation creeping up my neck. 20 years of Sunday dinners, and suddenly I was the outsider. I quietly moved to the folding chair they'd set up in the corner, near the kitchen door where the servers would sit if we were fancy enough to have servers. But we weren't. We were just the Garcia family from Springfield, Ohio, and I was apparently the family member who didn't matter enough for a real seat. As I picked at my food, listening to Janet excitedly describe her plans for updating the house, with Michael nodding along like a bobblehead, I caught something in my peripheral vision. Grandpa Garcia was watching me from across the table, and there was something in his weathered face that looked almost angry. The thing is, I should have seen this coming. The signs were there for months, maybe even years, but I'd been too busy playing the role of the perfect daughter to notice how quickly I was being erased from my own family. It started small, like these things always do. Michael would text the family group chat about dinner plans, and somehow my messages would get overlooked in the thread. Mom would mention family decisions that had been made without me, like when they decided to switch the Christmas celebration from Christmas Day to Christmas Eve, because it was more convenient for Janet's schedule. When I pointed out that I'd already requested Christmas Day off work for the first time in 5 years, Mom just sighed and said, "Well, you can change it, can't you? Janet can't exactly change being pregnant." Then there were the financial conversations that happened around me, but never included me. Hushed phone calls between Michael and Dad about family investments and long-term planning. When I asked about it over dinner one night, they all exchanged glances before Dad said, "It's nothing you need to worry about, sweetheart. Michael's got it handled." Michael's got it handled. That was rich, considering I'd been quietly covering Michael's shortfalls for 3 years running. When his construction business went under in 2019, guess who helped with his mortgage payments? When Janet decided she needed a baby moon vacation to Cancun while unemployed, guess whose credit card mysteriously got used for family emergency expenses that same week? But I never said anything. That's what good daughters do, right? We sacrifice quietly, smile when it hurts, and pretend that bleeding ourselves dry for family is noble instead of stupid. The worst part wasn't even the money. It was watching Janet slowly take over my childhood home, like she was renovating her way into permanent ownership. First, it was just a few decorative touches to make the guest room more welcoming for when she and Michael stayed over. Then it was updating the bathroom with better lighting for Janet's morning routine. Before I knew it, she was rearranging the living room furniture and talking about our family traditions, like she'd been a Garcia her whole life. And everyone just let it happen. Mom would beam whenever Janet suggested changes, like she'd been waiting her whole life for someone to care enough about the house to modernize it. Dad would nod along to Janet's ideas about maximizing the space and creating better flow. Even my teenage niece Sophia, Michael's daughter from his first marriage, seemed to prefer Janet's company to mine lately. I tried to bring it up once, gently, during a phone call with Mom. Don't you think Janet's getting a little comfortable with making changes to your house? Mom's response was swift and sharp. Janet's family, Brenda, and she has such good taste. Besides, Michael works so hard. If making the house nice for Janet makes him happy, why would I have a problem with that? The implication was clear. I was being petty and jealous. I was the unmarried daughter who couldn't appreciate another woman's touch in her mother's house. I was the problem. But Grandpa Garcia saw everything. At 87, he didn't miss much, even if he didn't always speak up. He'd been living with my parents since Grandma passed 2 years ago, and from his corner chair in the living room, he had a perfect view of all the family dynamics. I'd catch him watching Janet with this puzzled expression, like he was trying to solve a math problem that didn't quite add up. Sometimes, late at night, when I'd come by to check on everyone, I'd find Grandpa sitting at the kitchen table with his coffee and his crossword puzzle. He'd look up at me with those sharp eyes and ask questions that seemed casual but felt loaded with meaning. That Janet sure has a lot of opinions about this house, doesn't she, mija? Your father's been spending a lot of time with those legal papers lately. You know anything about that? Michael seems stressed about money again. Good thing you've always been the responsible one, eh? I'd shrug off his comments, thinking he was just being an observant old man. But now, sitting in that folding chair while Janet planned renovations to my childhood home, I realized Grandpa had been trying to tell me something all along. The dinner conversation swirled around me like I wasn't even there. Janet was describing her vision for converting Dad's old workshop into a nursery, complete with better insulation and maybe some skylights for natural light. Michael was nodding enthusiastically, already sketching rough floor plans on his napkin. Mom was practically glowing with excitement about becoming a grandmother again. We could move all of Dad's tools to the garage, Janet continued, her hands gesturing expansively. I mean, he hardly uses that space anymore anyway, right? And the baby will need somewhere quiet for naps. Dad, who had spent 40 years building furniture and fixing neighbors' broken appliances in that workshop, just smiled and nodded. Whatever makes you happy, Janet. It's just collecting dust anyway. My throat felt thick. That workshop wasn't just collecting dust. It was where Dad had taught me how to use a drill, where we'd spent countless Saturday mornings building birdhouses and fixing broken toys. But apparently, those memories were worth less than Janet's nursery dreams. What about the master bedroom? Janet asked, turning to Mom. I was thinking we could repaint it something more modern, maybe a nice sage green. And those curtains have got to go. They're so dated. Mom actually clapped her hands together. Oh, that sounds wonderful. I've been wanting to update that room for years. What do you think, honey? She turned to Dad, who was already nodding his approval. That's when I saw Grandpa's hand tighten around his fork. The metal trembled slightly against the ceramic plate, creating a tiny scraping sound that somehow felt louder than all the enthusiastic planning happening around the table. I had been quiet through all of this, picking at my food and trying to process how quickly I'd become invisible in my own family. But watching Janet casually redesign my parents' most personal space, while they thanked her for the privilege, was the moment something inside me finally cracked. And apparently, I wasn't the only one who'd reached a breaking point. Grandpa Garcia's fork hit his plate with a sharp clink that cut through Janet's excited chatter like a knife. The table went silent, all eyes turning to the elderly man who rarely spoke during family dinners anymore. He pushed his chair back slowly, the legs scraping against the hardwood floor with deliberate precision. At 87, Grandpa still commanded attention when he wanted it, and right now he definitely wanted it. Actually, he said, his voice carrying that particular authority that comes with age and absolute certainty, she owns this house. The words landed like a bomb in the middle of our Sunday roast. Janet's mouth fell open mid-sentence. Michael's fork froze halfway to his mouth. Mom and Dad exchanged confused glances, and I felt my own heart stop beating for what felt like a full minute. "What?" Janet's voice came out as barely a whisper. Grandpa Garcia looked directly at me, and for the first time in months, I saw something that had been missing from every family gathering: respect. "Brenda owns this house, has for years now. You want to redecorate, you better ask the owner." The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, even Mrs. Peterson's dog barking 3 houses down. But nobody at that table said a word. Michael was the first to break. That's not possible. Grandpa, you're confused. This is Mom and Dad's house. It's always been Mom and Dad's house." But Grandpa was already moving toward the old secretary desk in the corner of the dining room, the one where important family documents lived alongside Mom's collection of thank you cards and Dad's reading glasses. His movements were slow but purposeful, and everyone watched in stunned silence as he pulled out a manila folder that looked official and intimidating. "Deeds in her name," he said simply, placing the folder on the table next to the mashed potatoes. "Has been since 2018. Mortgage payments come from her account. Property taxes, homeowner's insurance, all of it. Brenda Garcia, legal owner." I felt dizzy, not because I didn't know. I'd known exactly what those documents said for 7 years, but because I'd never planned for this moment, never imagined that my carefully guarded secret would be exposed over Sunday dinner while my sister-in-law planned to redecorate my property. Janet's face had gone from flushed excitement to pale shock. But Michael said, "We've been planning to renovate someone else's house without asking," Grandpa finished. "That what you call it?" The weight of every family decision, every casual dismissal, every assumption about my place in the family hierarchy suddenly shifted. I wasn't the unmarried daughter who didn't belong at the table. I was the daughter who owned the table, the house, and everything they'd been so casually redistributing without my input. Dad found his voice first, though it came out rough and uncertain. "Brenda, is this true?" I looked around the table at my family, my brother who hadn't made a mortgage payment in 3 years, my sister-in-law who'd been planning to gut my property, my parents who'd been letting her do it, and my grandfather who'd been keeping my secret until he couldn't stand it anymore. "Yes," I said quietly, "it's true." The explosion of voices that followed was immediate and overwhelming. Michael demanding explanations, Janet asking how this was possible, Mom crying about being confused, Dad wanting to know when this happened. But I could only focus on Grandpa, who had settled back into his chair with a satisfied nod. "Why didn't you tell us?" Mom's voice cracked with hurt and confusion. It was the question I'd been dreading for 7 years, the one I'd rehearsed answers for in my head, but never thought I'd have to voice out loud. How do you explain to your family that you bought their house because they were drowning financially, but you never told them because you didn't want to rob them of their dignity? How do you say that you've been covering their expenses while they treated you like you were lucky to be included? "Because I didn't want this," I said, gesturing at the chaos around the table. "I didn't want you to feel less than. I wanted you to feel secure." "But honey," Mom said, tears streaming down her face, "we had no idea. All these years we thought—" "You thought what?" The words came out sharper than I intended. "You thought you were doing me a favor by letting me come to Sunday dinner? You thought you were being generous by giving me the worst seat in the house?" Michael slammed his hand on the table, making the water glasses jump. "This is insane. You can't just secretly buy our parents' house and not tell anyone. That's not how families work." "No." I stood up, feeling a surge of something I hadn't felt in years: power. "How do families work, Michael? Do they work by having financial meetings without the person who's actually paying the bills? Do they work by letting your wife plan renovations to a house that doesn't belong to you?" Janet had been silent through this exchange, but now she spoke up, her voice small and embarrassed. "I didn't know. Michael, you said your parents owned the house." "They do own it," Michael insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. "I mean, they live here. They've always lived here." Grandpa opened the manila folder and spread the documents across the table, like he was revealing the winning hand in a poker game. Mortgage was 3 months behind in 2017. Your parents were looking at foreclosure. Brenda stepped in, bought the house, kept it in the family. Been making payments ever since. The numbers were all there in black and white. Purchase date, loan information, payment history. 7 years of mortgage payments, property taxes, insurance premiums, all traceable back to my bank account. 7 years of letting my family live in my house while treating me like I was lucky to be invited to dinner. "The workshop Janet wants to turn into a nursery," Grandpa continued, seemingly enjoying himself now. "That's Brenda's workshop. The master bedroom she wants to repaint? That's Brenda's master bedroom. This whole house, every room, every wall, every decision about what happens here, that all belongs to Brenda." I watched my family absorb this information, saw the moment when the reality of their situation finally sank in. Janet wasn't planning renovations to her in-laws' house. She was planning renovations to my house without asking permission, while I sat in the corner like hired help. "Why?" Dad's voice was barely audible. "Why didn't you tell us?" The question hung in the air, heavy with 7 years of misunderstanding. I looked at my father, this man who had worked construction his entire life until his back gave out, who had taken such pride in providing for his family, and I realized that my silence hadn't protected his dignity. It had stolen mine. Because I thought that's what love looked like, I said finally. I thought love meant sacrificing in secret. I thought it meant letting you keep your pride even if it cost me mine. But as I looked around the table at my family's shocked faces, I realized that my secret had cost us all something much more valuable than pride. It had cost us honesty, respect, and the chance to build a relationship based on truth instead of assumptions. The Sunday roast was completely cold by now, but nobody seemed to care about dinner anymore. We had 7 years of honesty to catch up on, and it was going to take a lot more than one meal to figure out what our family looked like when the truth was finally on the table. The silence that followed Grandpa's revelation stretched on until I could hear my own heartbeat. Janet sat frozen, her hands still gesturing toward imaginary renovations that would never happen. Michael stared at the documents spread across our dinner table, like they might disappear if he looked hard enough. My parents looked lost, caught between gratitude and embarrassment, while I stood there feeling something I hadn't experienced in years: complete control over my own family dynamic. So what happens now? Michael's voice cracked slightly, the way it used to when we were kids, and he got caught doing something wrong. I sat back down, but not in the folding chair by the kitchen door. I walked around the table and took my grandfather's seat at the head, the seat that had always belonged to the head of the household. Now we have a conversation that should have happened 7 years ago. Janet finally found her voice, though it came out shaky and uncertain. Brenda, I had no idea. Michael told me that your parents owned the house and that he said we were helping them by planning improvements. Helping them with what? I asked, keeping my tone level despite the anger bubbling underneath. Helping them spend my money on renovations I never approved? Helping them redesign my property to suit your preferences? Michael's face flushed red. Don't blame Janet for this. She didn't know. You're right, she didn't know, because you lied to her. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through our family text messages. Here's a message from last month. Janet and I are thinking of updating the kitchen. Dad said it was okay. Here's another one from September. Janet found the perfect paint color for the living room. Mom loves it. I looked up at my brother, who was avoiding eye contact. At what point in these conversations did you mention that you were asking permission to renovate someone else's house? This is still the family house, Michael said defensively. You can't just hold this over our heads forever. We're still family. Are we? The question came out colder than I intended, but I didn't take it back. Because for the past 2 years, I've felt more like a stranger than family. When was the last time anyone asked my opinion about anything that happened in this house? When was the last time anyone considered my feelings about major decisions? Mom wiped her eyes with her napkin. Honey, we never meant to make you feel excluded. We assumed. You assumed I didn't matter enough to include. I turned to face her directly. Mom, you literally told me I don't belong in my usual seat, in my own house, at my own dinner table. The weight of those words seemed to hit everyone at once. Dad put his head in his hands. Michael stared at his plate. Janet looked like she wanted to disappear entirely. But I wasn't done. 7 years of swallowing my feelings, 7 years of watching my family take my generosity for granted, 7 years of being treated like the least important Garcia in the room. It all came pouring out. Do you want to know what it's been like? I asked, my voice getting stronger with each word. Watching Janet rearrange my furniture while you all praised her decorating skills. Listening to Michael make plans for my workshop while Dad nodded along. Sitting in family meetings about my property while being told I wouldn't understand the financial complexities. Michael finally looked up. We were trying to protect you. You don't know what it's like having to worry about mortgage payments and property taxes, and I've been paying the mortgage for 7 years. The words exploded out of me, loud enough that I saw Mrs. Peterson's curtains twitch next door. I know exactly what it's like because I've been doing it while you planned renovations with my money. The table fell silent again, but this time the silence felt different. This wasn't shock. This was recognition. Finally, they were seeing me as something other than their grateful, invisible safety net. Grandpa reached over and patted my hand. Tell them the rest, Mia. I took a deep breath and pulled out my phone again, this time opening my banking app. You want to know about financial complexities? Let's talk about financial complexities. I turned the screen so everyone could see. This is my savings account from 2017, before I bought this house. $43,000. Want to see it now? I swiped to my current balance, $8,000. Where did the money go? I continued. Well, there's the down payment on this house, $15,000, 7 years of mortgage payments that should have come from your retirement savings, another $18,000. The new roof you needed last year, $4,000. Michael's emergency car repair when his transmission died, $3,000. Janet's medical bills when she didn't have insurance, $2,200. With each number, I watched my family's faces change. The defensive anger faded, replaced by something that looked uncomfortably like shame. But that's not all, I said, my voice getting quieter, but somehow more powerful. There's also the emotional cost. Do you know what it's like to watch your brother's wife plan renovations to your house while being told you don't belong at the dinner table? Do you know what it's like to pay for everyone's emergencies while being excluded from family financial discussions? Janet started crying, not the manipulative tears I'd seen her use on Michael, but genuine mortified sobs. Oh God, Brenda, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I would never have. If I had known this was your house. But you did know I was family, I said. And you still thought it was okay to push me out of my own seat. Michael stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This is insane. You can't just ambush us like this. If you had a problem with how we were treating you, you should have said something years ago. I tried. I pulled up more text messages. Here's me asking if we could have family meetings that included everyone. Here's me suggesting we discuss household decisions together. Here's me asking why I wasn't consulted about the living room furniture rearrangement. Want to see the responses? I started reading aloud. Don't worry about it, Brenda. We've got it handled. You're overthinking things as usual. Janet has such good taste, just trust her. Why are you being so difficult about this? Each quote hit like a physical blow, and I could see my family reliving those moments with new context. They hadn't been protecting me from stress. They'd been dismissing me entirely. Dad finally spoke up, his voice rough with emotion. Brenda, honey, I had no idea. We never meant to make you feel, if we had known you owned the house. Would it have mattered? I asked. Should you only treat family members with respect if they're paying your bills? The question hung in the air, unanswered and unanswerable. Here's what's going to happen, I said, standing up again and looking around the table at each family member in turn. This is my house, and these are my rules. If you want to continue living here, we're going to make some changes. Michael started to protest, but I held up my hand. First, all household decisions get discussed with me. Paint colors, furniture arrangements, renovations, landscaping. If it affects this property, I have final approval. Janet nodded quickly, still wiping tears from her cheeks. Second, family financial discussions include the person who's actually handling the family finances. That's me. No more secret meetings about money when I'm the one paying the bills. Dad cleared his throat. Brenda, we want to pay you back. We had no idea you were covering so much. We'll discuss repayment plans later. Right now, I'm establishing ground rules for moving forward. I walked over to the window, looking out at the yard where I'd played as a child, the driveway where I'd learned to ride my bike, the porch where Grandpa still sat every morning with his coffee. This was my house now, but it was still my family's home. I had to figure out how to balance those two truths. Third, I continued, turning back to face them. Family meetings happen here, at this table, with everyone present. No more group texts that somehow exclude me. No more decisions made around me instead of with me. Michael was staring at his hands. What about the nursery? Janet's already 7 months along. I looked at Janet, who was trying very hard not to meet my eyes. The guest room can be a nursery, but Dad's workshop stays Dad's workshop, and any modifications need my approval and my budget planning. Relief flooded Janet's face. Thank you, I'm so sorry, Brenda. I really didn't know. I believe you, I said, and I meant it. But not knowing doesn't excuse how I've been treated. You both participated in making me feel like I didn't belong here. Mom reached across the table toward me. Honey, can you forgive us? We made such a mess of this. I looked around the table at my family, really looked at them, maybe for the first time in years. They weren't villains, just people who had gotten comfortable with a dynamic that worked for them while ignoring how it affected me. Michael wasn't malicious, just selfish and thoughtless. Janet wasn't evil, just entitled and inconsiderate. My parents weren't cruel, just grateful for help and willing to let someone else make the hard decisions. But their intentions didn't erase the impact of their actions. I can forgive you, I said slowly, but things have to change, really change. I can't go back to being the invisible family member who pays the bills and gets thanked by being pushed to the corner. What do you need from us? Dad asked. I need you to see me, not as your safety net or your problem solver or your financial backup plan. I need you to see me as a person whose feelings and opinions matter, whose presence at this table is valued, whose voice deserves to be heard. Grandpa smiled at me from across the table. About time you said that, mija. The rest of dinner was awkward, but it was a different kind of awkward. Instead of the familiar discomfort of being ignored, it was the growing pains of a family learning how to interact with honesty instead of assumptions. Michael kept glancing at me like he was seeing me for the first time. Janet asked permission before suggesting we move to the living room for coffee. Mom included me in plans for next week's dinner. Dad asked if I wanted to help him organize the workshop. Small changes, but they felt monumental. As we cleared the dishes, Janet pulled me aside in the kitchen. "Brenda, I want you to know that I'm going to talk to Michael about contributing more financially. This arrangement you've had, it's not fair to you." "I appreciate that," I said, loading plates into the dishwasher. "But more than money, I need respect. I need to be treated like I belong in this family." "You do belong," she said firmly, "and I'm going to make sure Michael understands that." Later, after Janet and Michael had gone home and my parents had retreated to their room for what I imagined was a very long conversation, I found myself alone in the kitchen with Grandpa. "Thank you," I told him as he finished his evening coffee. "For speaking up, for keeping my secret until it was time to tell it." He nodded thoughtfully. "You're a good girl, Brenda. Always have been, but being good shouldn't mean being invisible." "I was scared," I admitted. Scared that if they knew the truth, they'd feel diminished or obligated. I wanted to help without changing the family dynamic. "But you did change the dynamic," Grandpa said gently. "You just changed it in a way that hurt you instead of helping everyone." He was right. By keeping my ownership secret, I'd created a power imbalance that allowed my family to take my generosity for granted while excluding me from the benefits of my own sacrifice. "What happens now?" I asked. Grandpa smiled and patted my cheek the way he used to when I was little. "Now you get to find out what this family looks like when everyone knows the truth." Over the next few weeks, that truth reshaped everything. Michael started looking for work with actual benefits and steady pay, motivated by the realization that his sister had been covering his financial shortfalls for years. Janet threw herself into planning a nursery that fit within an actual budget, asking my opinion on every decision and including me in baby preparations. My parents began insisting on contributing to household expenses, even though I'd been covering everything for years. More importantly, they started asking my opinion about everything from grocery shopping to holiday plans. The changes weren't always smooth. Michael struggled with his pride, sometimes lashing out when he felt emasculated by his younger sister's financial success. Janet overcorrected, asking permission for things that didn't require it and treating me like a landlord instead of family. But gradually, we found our new rhythm. Family dinners became actual discussions instead of monologues. Financial decisions became collaborative planning sessions. Home improvements became projects we tackled together, with everyone contributing according to their abilities. 6 months later, at our first Christmas in the new normal, I found myself sitting in my proper place at the head of the table, not because I owned the house, but because my family finally saw me as someone worth listening to. Michael had found steady work and insisted on covering the utilities. Janet had transformed the guest room into a beautiful nursery while keeping Dad's workshop intact. My parents had started a small repayment plan, even though I'd told them it wasn't necessary. Most importantly, when my nephew was born 3 weeks early, I wasn't notified after the fact. I was called immediately, included in every decision, and welcomed into the hospital room as the baby's aunt and the family's matriarch. As I held little David Garcia for the first time, Janet squeezed my hand. "I want him to grow up knowing how lucky he is to have an aunt who taught this family what love actually looks like." "What do you mean?" I asked, not taking my eyes off the tiny face peeking out of his blue blanket. "Real love isn't quiet sacrifice," she said. "It's honest communication. It's respecting each other enough to tell the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. You taught us that. Later that night, driving home to my house, a house that everyone now acknowledged was mine, while still feeling like ours, I thought about the journey that had brought us here, the pain of being invisible, the courage to speak up, the difficulty of rebuilding relationships on a foundation of honesty instead of assumptions. I thought about the Sunday dinner that had changed everything, and Grandpa's decision to break 7 years of silence. I thought about the scared, accommodating woman I'd been, always worried about disrupting family harmony, even at the cost of my own dignity. That woman was gone, replaced by someone who understood that respect isn't given freely. It's earned through boundaries, maintained through honest communication, and strengthened by the courage to demand better treatment. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "Thanks for not giving up on us. We're lucky to have you as our sister and our landlord." I smiled and typed back, "You're lucky to have me as your sister. The landlord thing is just a bonus." As I pulled into my driveway, I saw Grandpa sitting on the porch swing, enjoying the cool evening air. He waved at me, and I knew he was thinking the same thing I was. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give your family isn't silent sacrifice, but the truth that sets everyone free to love each other better. The house was mine, but more importantly, my place in the family was finally, authentically mine too. And that was worth more than any deed or mortgage payment could ever represent.